My family humiliated me in a luxury restaurant, but I made them regret it all. The wine hit my face before I even understood what was happening. Cold, red, and deliberate. My mother's voice sliced through the gasps around us. Now maybe you'll finally learn your place. Riley. 30 pairs of eyes turned toward me as I stood there in that $2,500 emerald dress, dripping in front of crystal chandeliers and white linen tables. I was a spectacle. A joke written in Cabernet Sauvignon. My sister, the one holding the empty glass, was smirking. My father was studying the intricate pattern on his dessert plate as if it held the secrets to the universe. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I smiled, because I knew that one act would cost them everything. Before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe, drop a comment, where are you watching from? I'm Riley Thompson, and my story starts in a quiet, manicured neighborhood outside San Diego. Our house was a picture-perfect two-story colonial with a lawn that my father, Robert, mowed into perfect diagonal stripes every Saturday morning. From the outside, we were the ideal American family. Inside, our home was less a sanctuary and more a stage, meticulously set for a play about a happy family that was never performed. The living room, with its cream-colored carpets and perfectly fluffed pillows, was for guests only. We lived in the small den off the kitchen, a cramped space where the tension was often so thick you could taste it. Appearances were everything, and genuine emotion was a mess that had to be cleaned up before someone saw. I grew up in a family where love was not a right, but a reward, and it was a reward I rarely earned. The conditions were simple. Be beautiful, be charming, be exciting. Be, in short, my older sister Tessa. My mom, Janet, was the director of this play. She was a woman who navigated the world with a scorecard, ranking everything from her neighbor's gardens to her own daughter's worth. Her love was a currency she invested in Tessa, who she saw as a blue-chip stock guaranteed to yield high social returns. I, on the other hand, was a safe but boring municipal bond. Reliable, low maintenance, but utterly lacking in glamour. Mom cared more about the social capital a daughter could bring her than the quiet, steady affection I offered. Tessa was her masterpiece. Bold, beautiful, and effortlessly popular. She was the one who got the lead in every school play, the one who was crowned prom queen, the one who could wrap our parents around her little finger with a dazzling, calculated smile. I remember my 10th birthday vividly. I had asked for a small party at a local bowling alley with my 3 best friends. It was all I wanted, but Tessa, who was 13, complained that bowling was for babies. She whined and pouted for days until my mother finally relented. My bowling party was canceled. Instead, Mom decided to host a more sophisticated sleepover party at our house for Tessa and her popular friends. My own friends were disinvited. They just wouldn't fit in, honey, Mom told me, patting my head dismissively. I spent my own birthday night huddled in my bedroom, listening to the shrieks of laughter from Tessa and her friends downstairs, feeling like a stranger in my own home. When it was time for cake, they sang a half-hearted happy birthday to me before devolving into a gossip session about boys I didn't know. I was a footnote at my own celebration. My dad, Robert, was a ghost in this family portrait. He worked long hours at an accounting firm, and when he was home, he was a silent observer, a master of strategic retreat. His primary role was to keep the peace, which he interpreted as never disagreeing with my mother and never intervening in the family's deeply skewed dynamics. His silence was a wall I could never break through, a moat around a castle where I wasn't welcome. I tried many times to reach him. When I was 16, I won a regional science fair for a project I had spent months on. I came home clutching a blue ribbon and a small trophy, my heart thrumming with a rare and fragile pride. I found him in the den reading the newspaper. "Dad, look," I said, holding out the ribbon. "I won." He glanced up from the sports page, his eyes barely focusing. "Oh, that's nice, honey. Good job." He then immediately turned his attention back to the paper. Just then, Tessa flounced into the room, complaining that her car was almost out of gas. Without a word, Dad reached into his wallet, pulled out a $50 bill and handed it to her. She snatched it without a thank you and left. He never looked at me again. The blue ribbon felt foolish in my hand, a cheap token of an achievement no one in my house cared about. His inaction was a quiet, constant betrayal that hurt more than any loud argument ever could. And then there was Tessa, the sun around which our family universe revolved. She learned early on that the rules that governed my life simply didn't apply to her. She coasted on a sea of charm and the endless safety net my parents provided, a safety net I was often forced to help weave. I was the family's stagehand, working tirelessly in the shadows to make sure the star, Tessa, always hit her mark under the brightest spotlight. While she was breezing through her college years on our parents' dime, majoring in communications and minoring in fraternity parties, I was meticulously planning my own escape. I knew I had to be self-sufficient. I worked 3 jobs to fund my education at a state school. I was a barista at 6 a.m., my hands raw from hot water and cleaning solution, smelling of burnt coffee and steamed milk. I was a library assistant in the afternoons. The profound silence of the book stacks a welcome respite from the noise of my life. In the evenings, I was a tutor, patiently explaining algebra to teenagers who complained about their parents not buying them the newest iPhone. I did it all without complaint, telling myself that this grueling schedule was the price of freedom. My family saw it differently. My hard work wasn't a sign of strength. It was proof that I lacked Tessa's innate sparkle. In their eyes, I had to work hard because I wasn't charming enough to have things handed to me. The pattern of my servitude was set early and repeated often. When Tessa crashed her brand new convertible, she didn't call our parents. She called me. It was 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, and I had an exam the next morning. Her voice on the phone was a high-pitched, theatrical wail. "Riley, you have to help me. I hit something. Dad's going to kill me." I drove 40 minutes to a dark, winding road to find her standing beside the car, which had a deeply crumpled fender. She was fine. Not a scratch on her, but she was crying hysterically. She spun a dramatic story about a deer jumping out of nowhere. I knew she was lying. I could smell the beer on her breath from 5 feet away. I calmed her down, dealt with the tow truck driver who looked at us with open disdain, and took her home. The next day, I withdrew $2,000, money I had painstakingly saved for a much-needed new laptop, and gave it to her to cover the insurance deductible. "Oh my God, you're a lifesaver," she'd said, hugging me briefly before her attention shifted back to her phone. "I promise I'll pay you back." Every penny. She never did. When I gently brought it up 6 months later, she looked at me with genuine surprise, as if I had spoken in a foreign language. "Oh, that?" She laughed. "Riley, don't be so obsessed with money. It's not a good look." My sacrifice was rebranded as an obsession. The pinnacle of my role as family financier came with her wedding. Tessa demanded a fairy tale event, and my mother was determined to give it to her, regardless of the cost. They were like 2 drunken sailors on shore leave, spending with wild abandon on a designer dress, an overpriced vineyard venue, and floral arrangements that cost more than my tuition for a semester. The bills, of course, arrived like a tidal wave, and my parents were drowning. That's when my mother sat me down at the kitchen table, her face a carefully constructed mask of maternal concern. She laid out a stack of red-stamped credit card statements. The numbers made my stomach clench. "Riley, honey," she began, her voice a soft, manipulative purr. "We're in a bit of a tight spot. We just wanted to give your sister the perfect day. You understand, don't you? We don't want to look poor in front of Greg's family. It's a matter of pride." She pushed the bills closer to me. "We were thinking, since you're so good with money and you don't have the expenses Tessa does, no husband, no house to save for, that maybe you could help us out, just until we get back on our feet." I looked at my dad, who was staring intently into his coffee cup as if it held the answers. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just cleared his throat and mumbled, "Your mother is right. It's for the family." So I did it. I walked to my bank the next day, feeling like a condemned prisoner on her way to the gallows, and I drained my savings account. The account I had been building since I was 15, the one that represented a future down payment on a small condo, my one tangible symbol of independence. I transferred the money to my mother's account, watching my dream disappear with a click of a button. At the wedding, as I stood in my simple bridesmaid dress that I'd paid for myself, I listened as Tessa gave a tearful speech, thanking my parents effusively for their unbelievable generosity. My name was never mentioned. I was an anonymous donor to the Church of Tessa. As the guests applauded, I felt a familiar hollowness spread through my chest, cold and vast. I wasn't a daughter. I was a utility, a resource to be tapped when needed and stored away when not. I was the family's silent investor, expected to contribute everything and ask for nothing in return. For years, I did it because I clung to a fragile, childish belief that one day the scales would tip, that one day they'd turn around and finally see me. They'd see the mountain of sacrifices I had made, and they would finally say, "Thank you, Riley. We see you. We appreciate you." But they never did. With every passing year, every canceled plan, every conversation that revolved around Tessa, the hope grew fainter. It was a dying ember that I kept trying to breathe life into, not realizing it was already cold, dead ash. The year I turned 30 was a study in insignificance. The milestone was completely eclipsed by Tessa's announcement that she and her husband, Greg, were thinking about trying for a baby. This non-event was treated with the gravity of a royal decree, demanding all of our family's emotional and conversational bandwidth. My birthday was an afterthought. My mother threw together a last-minute celebration that consisted of a dry, store-bought cake and a lecture about my dwindling fertility. "You're not getting any younger, Riley," she'd said, cutting me a thin slice. "All this focus on your career is fine, but a woman needs a family." The only gift from them was a card with a hastily scrawled, "Love, Mom and Dad," and a check from Tessa for $50, enclosed with a note that read, "Go buy yourself something pretty." It was a pathetic fraction of the thousands I had given her, a gesture so condescending it felt more like a slap in the face. The days following that non-party were bleak. I went back to work, numb and disheartened. Then something happened. I was in a meeting, presenting a major marketing strategy I had developed over 6 months of grueling work. When I finished, the client, a notoriously difficult CEO, stood up and applauded. My boss pulled me aside afterward, her eyes shining with genuine pride. "Riley," she said, "that was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. We're promoting you, senior brand strategist. It comes with a significant raise. You've earned every penny." I stood in the hallway, the praise echoing in my ears, and the contrast between my professional life and my personal life struck me with the force of a physical blow. At work, I was seen, valued, and rewarded for my hard work. At home, I was a ghost, a walking ATM. In that moment, something inside me didn't just shift, it broke. The ember of hope I had guarded for so long finally went out, and in its place, a cold, hard resolve began to form. I was done. Done waiting for their approval. Done being the family's dependable, invisible support system. I had spent my entire life making myself smaller to let them shine, and I had nothing to show for it but a depleted bank account and a heart full of fractures. So, as my 31st birthday approached, I decided I wanted one thing: to celebrate me. No drama, no guilt trips, no sharing the spotlight. One evening dedicated to acknowledging my own life, on my own terms. My new salary had kicked in, and for the first time I felt a sense of financial power. I wanted to mark the occasion. I chose La Violette. It wasn't just an exclusive restaurant. It was a symbol. Years ago, my parents had gone there for a milestone anniversary, and they had talked about it for months afterward. The impeccable service, the exquisite food, the sheer glamour of it all. It was a place reserved for special people. Tessa had always assumed she'd be taken there for her own big moments, but somehow it never happened. By choosing La Violette, I was subconsciously planting a flag. I was claiming a status they had never afforded me. I was declaring that I, Riley Thompson, was a special person too. The guest list was small and carefully curated. My real family, Jade and Mia, they were the ones who had seen me through the worst of it. They had brought me ice cream after my disastrous 30th birthday. They had helped me practice my big presentation. They knew the whole ugly story with my family, and they loved me anyway. When I told them my plan over coffee, they were ecstatic for me, but cautious. La Violette. "That's amazing, Ree," Jade had said, her eyes wide. "But are you sure about inviting your family? After everything?" I took a deep breath, the coffee cup warm in my hands. "I have to," I said, trying to convince myself as much as them. "It's one last chance. This time it's on my turf. It's a place I chose, a dinner I am paying for. They'll be my guests. Maybe, just maybe, that dynamic shift will force them to see me differently. Maybe they'll have to respect me." Mia reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "We'll be there right beside you. Your personal bodyguards." We all laughed, but we knew she was only half joking. The planning became my quiet rebellion. I called the restaurant, my voice clear and steady as I requested the private room, the one with the skyline view. I prepaid the hefty deposit with my own credit card, typing in the numbers with a sense of defiant satisfaction. It felt like a declaration of independence. I studied the wine list online and selected a limited vintage Cabernet Sauvignon, a bottle that cost more than my first car payment. This wasn't about showing off. It was about tasting a life I had built for myself, a life they had no part in. The final piece of my preparation was the dress. I saw it in a boutique window a week before the dinner, and it stopped me in my tracks. It was a floor-length gown of emerald green silk that shimmered and moved like liquid light. It was bold and elegant, and it was ridiculously, terrifyingly expensive. The price tag, $2,500, made my practical side, the one honed by years of scarcity, scream in protest. I walked past the shop 3 times that week, drawn to the dress but intimidated by its cost. Finally, on Friday, I walked in. The sales assistant looked me up and down. her expression cool and dismissive. I almost turned and left, but then I remembered my promotion, my new salary, and the reason I was doing all of this. "I'd like to try on the green gown in the window," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. The moment I zipped it up in the dressing room, the argument in my head went silent. The silk was cool and heavy against my skin. It fit as if it were made for me. For the first time, I didn't see the quiet, responsible girl who always wore sensible clothes. I saw a woman, powerful, confident, unapologetic. "It's beautiful on you," the sales assistant said, her tone having changed completely. As I stood at the register, handing over my card, I did a quick, bitter calculation in my head. "This costs more than Tessa's car repair. This is a fraction of the wedding debt. I've earned this. I've earned this 10 times over." The dress was my armor. On the day of the dinner, a nervous energy buzzed beneath my skin. I took my time getting ready, a ritual of self-care. I styled my hair, applied my makeup, and finally slipped on the emerald dress. Looking at my reflection, I saw the woman I wanted to be, strong, successful, in control. For a fleeting, dangerous moment, I allowed myself to believe in the fantasy I had constructed. A perfect evening where my family would see me, truly see me, and their eyes would fill with a pride I had craved my entire life. They would raise a glass and toast to their daughter, the one they had finally learned to value. It was a beautiful, fragile thought. And like most beautiful things in my life, I should have known it was destined to be shattered. I arrived at Le Violette 20 minutes early, a habit born from a lifetime of anticipating the needs of others. The maitre d' greeted me by name, his smile warm and professional. "Miss Thompson, your private room is ready. It is a pleasure to have you with us tonight." His courtesy was a small, validating balm. Walking behind him, the soft click of my heels on the marble floor sounded like a countdown to either triumph or disaster. The main dining room was a symphony of quiet elegance, the low murmur of conversation, the gentle clinking of silverware on fine china, and a string quartet playing softly in the corner. The private room was even more beautiful than I had imagined. A long mahogany table was set with crisp white linen, polished silver, and an army of sparkling crystal glasses. One wall was made entirely of glass, offering a breathtaking panoramic view of the San Diego skyline as the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and purple. A vase of white lilies sat in the center of the table, their delicate, clean scent filling the air. It was perfect. It was a scene from a life I'd only ever dreamed of. Jade and Mia arrived right on time, their faces lighting up when they saw me. "Riley." "Oh my God, stop it right now," Jade exclaimed, pulling me into a hug. "You look like a movie star." "That dress is everything." Mia handed me a beautifully wrapped gift. "Happy birthday, Ry. Seriously, you deserve all of this and more." They were my anchors in the impending storm, their genuine excitement a soothing counter-frequency to the hum of my anxiety. A waiter appeared as if by magic to pour us glasses of champagne. For the next 40 minutes, the evening was everything I had hoped it would be. We laughed until our sides hurt. We reminisced about our college days, our terrible jobs, the awful apartments we had shared. We talked about our hopes, our careers, our futures. Their gifts were deeply personal. Jade had found a rare first edition copy of my favorite novel, and Mia had framed a collage of photos from our trips together over the years, a visual history of our unbreakable bond. We toasted to my promotion, to my new life, to a future free from the ghosts of the past. In that golden bubble of time, I felt seen, celebrated, and unconditionally loved. The bubble popped the moment my family arrived. They were 45 minutes late. There was no apology, no text message warning me they were running behind. The wait had been agonizing. I'd checked my phone a dozen times. I finally called my mother, who answered with an irritated sigh. "We're coming, Riley. Be patient." Tessa had a wardrobe crisis. The implication was clear. Tessa's minor inconvenience trumped my major celebration. They swept into the room not as guests, but as critics, bringing a palpable chill that instantly cooled the warm atmosphere. Tessa led the charge, strutting in like she was on a runway. She was wearing a tight, shockingly white cocktail dress, a deliberate and audacious choice for someone else's birthday dinner. It was a dress that screamed, "Look at me." My elegant emerald gown suddenly felt too somber, too serious. Behind her, my mother, Janet, glided in, her lips pursed in a thin line of disapproval as she scanned the opulent room. Her eyes didn't land on me, her daughter, the birthday girl. They were too busy calculating the cost of the chandeliers. My father and Greg trailed behind them, looking like unwilling accessories. Dad's shoulders were already hunched, as if anticipating a blow. So, This is where our hardworking girl spends her money, my mother said, her voice carrying across the table. It was not a compliment. It was an indictment. I forced a brittle smile, determined not to let them win. Not tonight. Hi, Mom. I'm so glad you could make it. I stood to hug her, but she offered only a stiff air kiss to my cheek, her eyes already moving on, assessing, judging. The assault was immediate and relentless, a series of passive-aggressive paper cuts. Wow. Riley, this place must cost a fortune, Tessa said, running a finger over a crystal water glass, leaving a smudge. I hope you're not living beyond your means. 6 figures must be nice, Greg chimed in with a smug grin. The rest of us have real responsibilities, like mortgages. $50 for a chicken breast? My mother exclaimed, after inspecting the menu as if it were a legal document full of loopholes. That's highway robbery. No wonder you're still single. Too busy buying fancy dinners for yourself to find a husband. I tried to defend my choice, my voice tighter than I wanted. It's a special occasion, Mom. I wanted to treat everyone to something nice. There's a difference between nice and wasteful, Riley, she retorted, not even looking at me. Your sister is trying to save for a family home. That's what responsible adults do with their money. Each comment was a carefully aimed dart, and Tessa smirked with every hit, sipping her champagne like it was a victory toast. My friends did their best to run interference. The view is just breathtaking, Riley, Mia said, her voice bright and firm, a desperate attempt to change the subject. My mother just sniffed. It's a bit ostentatious, don't you think? The conversation was a battlefield. I tried to steer it to neutral topics, the weather, a popular TV show, but they always found a way to circle back to money and my perceived selfishness. Tessa engaged the waiter with a condescending air, asking loudly, "Is this water imported? It had better be for this price." My father, as usual, was a void. He sat silently, methodically eating his bread, his gaze fixed on the table. His silence was not peaceful. It was a screaming testament to his cowardice. He wouldn't defend me. He never had. The worst part was watching the evening through my friends' eyes. I could see the pity and horror dawning on their faces as they witnessed the full extent of my family's casual cruelty. They had heard the stories, but seeing it live was different. It was like showing someone the scars you've always kept hidden. My internal monologue was a frantic loop of self-recrimination. Just ignore it. Don't let them win. Smile. Why did I do this? Why did I think this time would be different? Jade was right. I am such an idiot for hoping. By the time the main courses were cleared, the beautiful room felt like a cage. The stunning view of the city lights was lost on me. All I could see were the judgmental faces of the people who were supposed to love me most. The joy I had felt just an hour before had completely evaporated, replaced by a familiar heavy ache in my chest. I wasn't celebrating. I was enduring. The arrival of dessert should have been a sweet reprieve, a signal that the ordeal was nearing its end. The waiter placed a delicate slice of chocolate lava cake in front of me, a single defiant candle flickering in its center. Jade and Mia launched into a warm, if slightly strained rendition of Happy Birthday. Their voices were a small island of sincerity in a sea of tension. My mother clapped along with a tight, forced smile that didn't reach her cold eyes. Tessa was ostentatiously bored, texting under the table. My father mumbled the lyrics weakly, out of tune, his heart clearly not in it. I closed my eyes and made a silent wish, not for health or happiness, but just for the strength to get through the next 30 minutes. I blew out the candle, and a fragile, temporary peace settled over the table. The only sounds were the soft scrapes of spoons against dessert plates. I was emotionally exhausted, my carefully constructed armor riddled with cracks. My smile felt like a heavy mask I could barely hold up. I was already planning my escape, rehearsing my goodbyes, ready to flee to the quiet sanctuary of my apartment. But Tessa wasn't done with me. She leaned back in her chair, a slow, predatory smirk spreading across her face. She placed her phone face down on the table, a gesture of finality, giving me her full, undivided attention for the first time all night. I knew that look. It was the look she got right before she went in for the kill. "So, Riley," she began, her voice deceptively light, a silken thread concealing a steel wire. "That was a big promotion you got. Rumor has it you make what, 6 figures now?" Her tone was casual, but her eyes were sharp, probing. It wasn't a question. It was an opening statement in a trial she had been planning all night. The air crackled. The quiet chatter from the main dining room seemed to fade away. My friends Jade and Mia froze mid-bite, their eyes darting nervously between Tessa and me. They knew, just as I did, that this was not an innocent inquiry. This was a targeted attack. Tessa continued before I could even respond, prodding the wound. "Must be nice not having to budget. Greg and I are investing in property. You know, a real asset. What are you even doing with all that extra cash? I tried to stay calm to deflect. I work hard for it, Tessa. Yeah, but some of us work smart, she retorted, with a smug glance at Greg. That was the opening my mother was waiting for. She set down her fork, dabbed her lips with her napkin, and fixed me with a look of practiced earnestness. She was now the concerned matriarch, the voice of reason. Well, if that's true, Riley, maybe you could finally help us out, she said, her voice resonating with theatrical hardship. Your father's firm is downsizing. His stress is through the roof. The property tax bill just came and it's a nightmare. And more importantly, she gestured toward Tessa, your sister and Greg have found the perfect little house to start their family in. A lovely place with a yard for their future children. But the down payment is just out of reach for them. She paused, letting the weight of their collective problems settle on my shoulders. You're the one without a family to support, Riley. No husband, no children. It's only right that you help your own flesh and blood. Family helps family. It's what we do. The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. My own birthday party, the one I had planned and paid for to celebrate my independence, had just been turned into a boardroom meeting where my assets were being liquidated for their benefit. They weren't just asking for money. They were demanding it. They were framing my success not as something to be celebrated, but as a communal resource they were entitled to plunder. A surge of anger, hot and sharp, cut through my exhaustion. I had heard enough. Mom, I said, my voice low but firm, vibrating with a rage I had suppressed for years. This is my birthday dinner. I invited you here to celebrate with me, not to be cornered into paying your bills. This is incredibly inappropriate, and I am not going to discuss it. My mother's face hardened. The mask of concern fell away, revealing the cold, hard contempt beneath. Oh, stop being so dramatic, Riley, she snapped, her voice dripping with scorn. Always so sensitive, so selfish. It's a simple conversation. That was it. That was the final push. My defiance, my refusal to play my assigned role, was the one thing they could not tolerate. Tessa, seeing her opening, made her final move. It was a gesture of pure distilled malice. With a look of utter contempt, she picked up my glass of wine, the expensive, limited vintage Cabernet I had been so excited to share. She swirled the dark red liquid, her eyes locked on mine. The flickering candlelight danced off the surface of the wine, and for a split second, the whole world seemed to slow down. I saw the flash of triumph in her eyes. I saw the subtle nod of approval from my mother. I saw my father's gaze drop to his plate in a final act of cowardly surrender. Then, with a cold, deliberate movement, she leaned across the table and poured the entire glass of red wine straight across my face and down the front of my brand new 2,500 emerald dress. The shock was a physical blow. The icy cold liquid splashing against my skin, the sticky rivulets running down my neck, the acrid smell of alcohol filling my senses. The dark red stain bloomed across the beautiful silk like a grotesque, violent wound. The room erupted in a collective gasp. I could feel the stares of the other patrons through the glass walls of the private room. My face burned with a humiliation so profound, so public it was almost surreal. The wine dripped from my chin onto the pristine white tablecloth, each drop a punctuation mark in my disgrace. Tessa set the empty glass down with a soft, definitive click. Her smirk was triumphant, victorious. "Consider that your donation," she said, her voice a venomous whisper that cut through the silence. My mother laughed, a short, sharp, approving sound that sealed her complicity. She didn't stop Tessa. She didn't scold her. She condoned it. My father just sat there, a statue of shame, a monument to inaction. Something inside me, something I had kept locked away and buried under decades of duty and disappointment, finally broke free. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't shame. It was a clean, white-hot rage that burned away every last vestige of the quiet, accommodating girl I used to be. The fire inside me, the one they had tried for so long to extinguish with their coldness and neglect, finally ignited into an inferno. The world seemed to hold its breath in the second after Tessa spoke. The red wine was a cold, sticky mask on my face, dripping from my chin onto the pristine emerald silk of my dress. The gasps around the room had subsided into a thick, horrified silence. Through the haze of shock, I could see my family's faces. Tessa's was a portrait of smug triumph. My mother's held a look of cold, satisfied approval. And my father was staring at his dessert plate, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth, a perfect statue of cowardice. He was an expert at looking away. My friends, however, were a blur of motion. Jade was halfway out of her seat, her face a thunderous mask of rage. That's it. she hissed, her voice low and dangerous. "We are leaving. Riley, let's go." Mia was already grabbing her purse, her eyes like daggers aimed at my sister. They were ready to go to war for me, but in that moment, something inside me, a deep and ancient tectonic plate of my soul, shifted. The white-hot rage I felt wasn't chaotic. It was clarifying. It burned away decades of fog, of hope, of excuses. In a flash, I saw my entire life laid out before me, a long road paved with my own sacrifices and their endless demands. I saw myself at 10, exiled from my own birthday party. I saw my science fair trophy gathering dust on a shelf unnoticed. I saw the thousands of dollars draining from my bank account for a car crash, for a wedding, for their pride. I saw every dismissive eye roll from my mother, every casual cruelty from my sister, every single time my father chose silence over me, and I saw them now, sitting at this table in a beautiful room I had paid for, feeling entitled not just to my money, but to my public humiliation. The wine on my dress wasn't an insult. It was a summary. It was the final invoice for a lifetime of one-sided transactions. The rage did not make me scream. It made me calm. It forged my spine into steel. My hands, I noticed with a strange sense of detachment, were perfectly steady. I slowly, deliberately, picked up the linen napkin from my lap. Jade and Mia paused, watching me, their movements frozen by my eerie composure. I didn't frantically wipe at my face. I brought the napkin up and gently, precisely dabbed the wine from my chin. It was not an act of cleaning. It was an act of control. I looked at Jade and gave her the slightest shake of my head. "Stay put," the look said. "I have this." She hesitated, then slowly sank back into her chair, her eyes never leaving my face, ready to spring the second I needed her. Then I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping softly against the polished floor, and I stood up. I could feel the weight of every stare in the restaurant, from the shocked patrons to the concerned maitre d' hovering near the doorway. I didn't look at them. I looked only at my family. My eyes met my mother's first. Her triumphant smirk faltered slightly, replaced by a flicker of confusion at my lack of tears. I held her gaze until she looked away, unnerved. Then I looked at Tessa. Her smugness was still there, but a tiny seed of doubt was beginning to sprout in her eyes. Finally, I looked at my father. He refused to meet my gaze, his focus still locked on his plate as if it were the most important document he'd ever audited. He was a coward to the very end. I let the silence stretch, letting them marinate in the awkwardness of what they had done. Then I spoke. My voice was not loud, not shaking. It was quiet even, and as cold as the ice in their water glasses. "You're right, Mom," I said, and the sound of my own calm voice surprised even me. "Family does help family." The words hung in the air, a perfect mimicry of her own manipulative phrase. I saw a flicker of relief on her face, a glint of victory in Tessa's eyes. They thought I was capitulating. They thought I had finally learned my place, that I was about to apologize and offer them my credit card. They believed, even after everything, that their power over me was absolute. They had no idea that I had just redefined the terms. I placed my napkin gently on the table beside my half-eaten cake. I took one last look at the scene, the beautiful room, the expensive food, the ugly faces of my abusers, and then I turned and walked away. I didn't run. I didn't storm out. I walked. My posture was perfect, my head held high. I could feel the wine-soaked silk of the dress clinging to my skin, a cold, wet reminder of my liberation. I walked past the other tables, past the faces of strangers filled with pity and shock. I walked past the maitre d' who rushed forward, his face etched with concern. "Ms. Thompson, is everything all right? Should I call security?" "No, thank you," I said, my voice still steady. "My guests will be settling the bill." I didn't look back. I walked out of the heavy oak doors into the cool San Diego night, and I took my first breath of free air. Jade and Mia were right behind me. They flanked me as we waited for the valet, their presence a warm, protective shield. The second we were in Mia's car, the dam of their fury broke. I have never in my life seen anything so disgusting. Jade seethed, her hands clenched in her lap. "Your mother just sat there and smiled. And Tessa, I wanted to rip her hair out." "We are never speaking to them again, Riley," Mia said, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "This is it. This is the last time." I leaned my head back against the cool leather of the seat and closed my eyes. They expected me to break down, to finally let the tears come, but I felt nothing but a vast, quiet calm. The inferno inside me had burned everything down to the foundations, and now, in the ashes, something new and solid was being built. "It's okay," I said softly. "No, it's not okay," Jade insisted. "She assaulted you. That dress is ruined." I opened my eyes and looked at her. a small, genuine smile touching my lips for the first time that night. "The dress did its job," I said. "It was armor." And it took the hit for me. When we got back to my apartment, I didn't throw the dress away. I took it off carefully, hung it on the back of my bathroom door, and looked at it. The ugly, dark stain was not a mark of shame. It was a battle scar. It was proof of the night I stopped being a victim and started being a survivor. It was the receipt for my freedom, paid in full. And as I stood there, I wasn't plotting revenge. I was planning a reckoning. I woke the next morning before my alarm, the sun casting long, clean stripes of light across my bedroom floor. For a moment, I lay perfectly still, expecting the familiar wave of dread and anxiety that usually followed a confrontation with my family. I braced myself for the emotional hangover, the shame, the self-recrimination, but it never came. Instead, I felt a profound sense of clarity, as sharp and bright as the morning sun. The rage from the night before had cooled and solidified into something far more potent: purpose. I got out of bed, walked into the bathroom, and saw the emerald dress hanging on the door. The dark red stain was a map of my past, a declaration of their crimes. I looked at it not with sadness, but with a cold resolve. I took it down, folded it carefully, and placed it in a box. It was evidence. My morning routine was a study in deliberate action. I made coffee, the rich aroma filling my quiet apartment. I showered, the hot water washing away the phantom stickiness of the wine, but not the memory. As I dressed for the day, in a sharp professional blazer and slacks, my new armor, I created a mental checklist. This wasn't going to be an emotional, spontaneous rampage. It was going to be a systematic, orderly dismantling of a toxic system I had enabled for far too long. Each step was a cord to be cut, a chain to be broken. My first stop was my bank. I walked into the cool, quiet lobby and went straight to the personal banker's office. A man named Mr. Henderson, who had known my family for years. He greeted me with his usual paternalistic warmth. "Riley, good to see you. What can we do for you today?" "Hello, David," I said, my voice polite but firm. "I need to make some changes to my accounts. I'd like to remove Janet and Robert Thompson as secondary beneficiaries and from any and all access to my accounts, effective immediately." His smile faltered. He blinked, confused. "Oh, is everything all right? I always thought it was so wonderful how you looked after your parents." The old Riley would have faltered, would have felt a pang of guilt at his words. The new Riley felt nothing but impatience. "My financial arrangements are changing," I said, my tone leaving no room for discussion. "I need the paperwork, please." He cleared his throat, suddenly all business. He printed out the forms and I signed them with a steady hand. Each signature felt like a revolutionary act. The first one cut off their emergency access to my checking account. The second severed their connection to my high-yield savings, the one I had rebuilt after the wedding fiasco. The third removed them as beneficiaries on my investment portfolio. With every stroke of the pen, I was reclaiming a piece of myself, erecting a wall they could never breach. I walked out of the bank feeling lighter than I had in years. Back in my car, I began the second phase, the tedious but necessary work of untangling our shared digital and domestic lives. I spent the next 2 hours on the phone, navigating automated menus and listening to dreadful hold music. It was the mundane reality of liberation. First, the family phone plan. For years, I had carried the main account, with my parents and Tessa on my plan, supposedly paying me back their share each month. They were always late if they paid at all. "Yes, I'd like to remove 3 lines from my account," I told the customer service representative. I gave him their names and numbers. "All right, ma'am. Those lines will be disconnected at the end of the current billing cycle. They will be notified that they need to set up their own accounts." "Perfect," I said. Click. One more cord cut. Next, the streaming services. Netflix, HBO Max, Hulu, all under my name, my credit card. My family used them constantly, Tessa even giving the passwords out to her friends. I went through each one, logged out all devices, and changed the passwords. A small petty act, perhaps, but it was symbolic. Their free entertainment was over. The last, and most significant, was the authorized user credit card I had given Tessa years ago for emergencies. The emergencies, of course, had turned out to be new shoes, expensive dinners, and spa days. I called the credit card company. "I need to revoke authorization for Tessa Thompson and have a new card issued to me immediately." The representative was efficient. "Yes, ma'am. Her card will be declined on its next use." I imagined the scene. Tessa at a boutique, her arms full of clothes, her card being declined. The flash of confusion, then indignation, then rage. I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. My final stop of the day was with my accountant, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Carol, whom I had been seeing for the past 3 years. Carol had been gently advising me for years to protect my assets. "Family is family, Riley," she had said during our last meeting, "but your finances need to be firewalled." I had always resisted, clinging to that foolish hope that my family would change. I walked into her office, and she knew instantly from the look on my face that something was different. "Let me guess," she said, leaning back in her chair. "You're finally ready to set up that trust." "I am," I said. "Ironclad, impenetrable. I want to move all my significant assets into it, effective immediately." She smiled, a rare and genuine expression of approval. "Riley, I'm proud of you. This is the smartest thing you'll ever do." For the next hour, we went over the paperwork. She explained the legal structure of a private trust, how it would create a formidable legal and financial barrier between my money and anyone else. It was a fortress, and I was finally building the walls. We finalized the paperwork, and I left her office feeling a sense of security I had never known. My future was finally, unequivocally, my own. That evening, I sat in my quiet apartment. My phone was silent. There were no texts from Tessa asking for money, no calls from my mother reminding me of some imagined obligation. The silence was vast and beautiful. I logged into my online banking portal and looked at my accounts. My name and my name alone was on them. I looked at my credit card statement, clean of Tessa's frivolous purchases. I wasn't happy, not yet. Happiness felt like a distant shore, but I was calm. I was in control. The humiliation of the night before had been a brutal, painful baptism by fire. But I had walked through it and emerged on the other side, clean and unburdened. They had meant to break me. Instead, they had set me free. The plan wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. And I was just getting started. A week passed in blissful, unprecedented silence. My phone, once a constant source of anxiety with its endless stream of demands and guilt trips, was now quiet. The absence of their noise was a balm to my soul. I worked, I saw my friends, I slept soundly for the first time in years. I was beginning to build a life on the foundation of peace I had created. The financial fortress was secure. The emotional walls were holding. Now, it was time for the consequences to find their way home. The opportunity arrived not with a bang, but with a bland corporate email. As a senior brand strategist at my PR firm, one of my responsibilities was to conduct periodic brand safety audits for our major clients. This involved reviewing the public-facing conduct of our clients' partner companies, including the social media presence of their key employees, to identify any potential reputational risks. It was usually a tedious, mind-numbing task of scrolling through endless LinkedIn profiles and bland corporate Twitter feeds. Then I saw the name, Greg Vandermeer. My sister's husband. His employer, a mid-level tech firm, was a partner company to one of our largest clients. It was a coincidence, a stroke of cosmic, terrible luck, or perhaps justice. His name was on a list for a routine social media review. A flicker of the old Riley surfaced, a brief, reflexive pang of hesitation. This is too much. This is vindictive. But then I remembered the wine. I remembered my father's blank face. I remembered Tessa's smirk. My hesitation vanished, replaced by a cold, clear sense of professional duty. Greg and Tessa had built their lives on a foundation of arrogance and my money. Their public persona was an extension of that arrogance. I had a feeling I knew what I would find. I opened Greg's public social media profiles. It was a cesspool of amateurish bragging and astonishingly poor judgment. There he was, posing in front of a leased luxury car with the caption, "Hard work pays off." Co-life. There were pictures of expensive dinners tagged with obnoxious hashtags like making bank and haters gonna hate. It was all a pathetic, transparent performance of wealth he didn't really have. Then I found Tessa's profiles, which were linked to his. Hers were even worse. She posted constantly, documenting a life of leisure and luxury that was funded by my sacrifices. There were photos of her at expensive salons with captions like, "A little self-care, because I'm worth it." There were thinly veiled digs at our family, clearly aimed at me. So blessed not to have a boring 9-to-5 desk job. Some people just don't know how to live. And then I found it. The smoking gun. A post from Tessa, dated the night of my birthday dinner. It was a selfie of her in that smug white dress, taken in the restaurant's bathroom. The caption read, "Having to suffer through a dreadfully boring family dinner tonight, but at least I look good. Some people just have no class." The hypocrisy was so potent it almost made me laugh. She, who had physically assaulted me in a public place, was accusing me of having no class. I scrolled further and found Greg's comment below her post. "Can't wait to get out of there, babe. Tell your sis to Venmo us for our time." LOL. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just unprofessional. It was actively malicious. And here was the crucial part. In several of his own posts bragging about his big deals, Greg had tagged his employer and my firm's client, directly linking his personal brand of toxic arrogance to their corporate identities. He was a walking, talking brand risk. My course of action was clear. This wasn't personal anymore. It was professional. My duty was to my firm and to our client. I meticulously took screenshots of everything. Greg's boastful posts, his client tagged bragging, Tessa's public mockery of her family, and, of course, their commentary from the night of the dinner. I compiled them into a single comprehensive document. I then drafted a memo to my director. The language was sterile, professional, and devoid of emotion. Subject: Brand Safety Audit Findings. Client name, partner company name, dear director's name. Per our standard Q4 brand safety review, the following public social media activity from a key employee at the partner company, Greg's employer, has been flagged as a potential reputational risk. The attached document contains screenshots of public posts from Mr. Greg Vandermeer and his spouse that demonstrate unprofessional conduct, disparaging remarks, and a lifestyle that is misaligned with the professional image of both his employer and our client. I recommend we forward this information to our contacts at client name so they can address it with their partner accordingly. Best regards, Riley Thompson. I read it over 3 times. It was perfect. I was not making an accusation. I was presenting evidence. I was not seeking revenge. I was fulfilling my job description. I attached the PDF and hit send. The corporate world moves slowly, and then all at once. For 3 days, I heard nothing. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, an email landed in my inbox from my director. Subject: Brand Safety Audit Findings Riley. A quick note to say thank you for your diligence on this. Our client was extremely grateful for the heads up. They have already addressed the issue with their partner company. Consider this matter closed. Great work. The email was short and to the point, but I knew what it meant. Address the issue was corporate speak for a swift and decisive action. My confirmation came 2 days later. On Saturday morning, my phone rang. The caller ID flashed a name I had not seen in over a week, Tessa. I let it ring 3 times, took a deep, calming breath, and answered. Hello? The sound that came through the speaker was not a voice, but a shriek. It was a raw, guttural scream of pure rage. You? How could you? You ruined us! I held the phone slightly away from my ear, waiting for the incoherent rage to subside. She was sobbing, screaming, a mess of fury and self-pity. Greg was fired. They called him into HR yesterday and fired him. They said he was an embarrassment to the company. They had pictures of his Instagram. Pictures of my posts. This was you. You did this. I let her exhaust herself, listening to the tirade with a sense of detached calm. She accused me of being a monster, a psychopath, a jealous, bitter spinster. The insults that once would have wounded me now felt like pebbles thrown against a fortress wall. They bounced off without leaving a mark. When she finally paused to take a ragged breath, I spoke. My voice was quiet, the calm eye in her hurricane. I didn't get him fired, Tessa. Liar! She screamed. His actions got him fired, I continued, my voice unwavering. Your actions got him fired. You posted that garbage for the whole world to see. Did you think there wouldn't be consequences? You did this to me. To my family, she wailed. The line was so absurd, so completely devoid of self-awareness, that a small, cold smile touched my lips. No, I said quietly, and with absolute finality. You did that yourself. Then, before she could scream again, I hung up. I blocked her number. I set my phone down on the counter, and in the profound, beautiful silence of my apartment, I felt the first true, undeniable glimmer of peace. After the phone call with Tessa, I had expected my parents to be the next wave of the assault. I braced myself for angry calls, manipulative voicemails, and guilt-laden text messages. But for days there was nothing. The silence was unnerving, the kind of quiet that precedes a storm. I knew they were regrouping, plotting their strategy. My mother wouldn't let this go. An attack on Tessa was an attack on her life's work. They chose to ambush me on a Sunday evening. I had just come home from a quiet dinner with Mia, feeling relaxed and content. A loud, aggressive knock echoed through my apartment door. It wasn't a friendly rap. It was a summons. I looked through the peephole and my stomach tightened. It was both of them, standing in the hallway, their faces grim and determined. My mother's arms were crossed tightly over her chest. My father stood slightly behind her, his expression a mixture of anger and discomfort. For a second, the old fear flickered inside me. The instinct to hide, to pretend I wasn't home, But then I remembered who I was now. This was my home, my sanctuary. They were the intruders. I took a deep breath, unlocked the deadbolt, and opened the door. I didn't invite them in. I stood in the doorway, blocking their path. "Hello," I said, my voice neutral. My mother pushed past me into the entryway, my father trailing in her wake. "Don't you hello me, Riley," she snapped, her eyes scanning my apartment with disapproval. "We need to talk. What you have done is unforgivable." I closed the door and leaned against it, crossing my arms. I was calm, an observer at a play I had seen too many times before. "There's nothing to talk about," I said. "Nothing to talk about?" My father finally spoke, his voice louder than I'd heard it in years. It was cracking with a manufactured outrage. "You got your sister's husband fired? They're going to lose their house. You've ruined their lives all because of a little spat." A little spat. The phrase was so dismissive, so utterly blind to the reality of what had happened, that it solidified my resolve into something unbreakable. My mother stepped forward, her face contorted with a righteous fury. "How could you be so cruel? So vindictive? To your own sister? After everything we've done for you? The upbringing we gave you? We raised you better than this. You have turned your back on this family." I let them finish. I let all their accusations and warped justifications fill the air between us. I listened as my mother painted Tessa as a blameless victim and me as a cold, heartless monster. I listened as my father, the great silent partner, finally found his voice, but only to defend the system that had victimized me for 3 decades. He told me I had gone too far, that I needed to fix this. He actually suggested I should use my professional connections to help Greg get his job back, and that I needed to give Tessa a sincere apology. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it all was breathtaking. They stood in my home, a home I had paid for with my own hard work, and demanded I clean up a mess they had created. They were not here to understand, to reconcile, or to apologize. They were here to reassert their control, to put me back in my place. When their tirade finally ran out of steam, the room fell silent. They stared at me, expecting me to crumble, to cry, to beg for their forgiveness as I had always done. I didn't. I stood up straight, uncrossing my arms. I looked my mother directly in the eye, and then I looked at my father. For the first time in my life, I wasn't looking at them as my parents, as figures of authority. I was looking at them as 2 deeply flawed, entitled people I happened to be related to. The fear was gone. The need for their approval was gone. All that was left was a sad, empty space where my love for them used to be. "Turned my back on family?" I began, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of 31 years of suppressed truth. "Let me tell you about family. For my entire life, I was the only one holding this family up. I was the emergency fund, the emotional janitor, the silent partner who paid for everything and was credited for nothing." I took a step forward. "I paid for Tessa's car accident when she was driving drunk. I paid off thousands of dollars of your credit card debt for her fantasy wedding. I funded her lifestyle. I cleaned up her messes. And I did it all while working 3 jobs to put myself through school, because you spent my college fund on a new deck. I gave you my money, my time, my energy, and my hope. And what did I get in return?" I held my mother's gaze. "In return for my 31st birthday, you arrived late? You insulted my success? You tried to extort money from me, and you, Mom, you laughed while your perfect daughter assaulted me in a public restaurant. You watched her pour wine on me and you smiled." I turned to my father. "And you watched it all happen. You watched it happen for 30 years. Every slight, every insult, every time they took from me. You saw it and you did nothing. You said nothing. Your silence was your consent. You are not an innocent bystander. You are an accomplice." Their faces were pale, shocked into silence by the brutal force of the unvarnished truth. "So, no," I finished, my voice like ice. "I haven't turned my back on family. I have finally stopped participating in a toxic, one-sided business arrangement where I was the only one paying the bills. The arrangement is over. You are no longer my responsibility." My mother finally found her voice, sputtering. "You'll regret this. When you're old and all alone, you'll regret this." "No," I said, walking to the door and opening it. "The only thing I regret is that I didn't do this sooner. Now please leave my home." They left, speechless and defeated. As they walked down the hall, I saw them not as the powerful, intimidating figures of my childhood, but as they truly were, small, weak people, terrified now that their primary resource had been cut off. I closed the door, and the finality of it was a profound relief. A few weeks later, I heard through a gossiping aunt that Tessa and Greg had been forced to sell their oversized SUV and had moved back into my parents' house. The dream of the upgraded home was dead. Tessa, for the first time in her life, was facing real consequences. That same day, I received the refund from Le Violette. The manager had been deeply apologetic about the unpleasant incident and had refunded the entire cost of the dinner, including the deposit. I took that money and went online to the website for a local charity that supports victims of domestic and emotional abuse. I made a large donation for the full amount of the refund. In the section that read, "Make this donation in honor of," I paused for only a second before I typed in my mother's name, Janet Thompson. It wasn't just revenge. It was poetic justice. I was taking the money from a night of humiliation she had orchestrated and turning it into a force for good, a way to help other women escape families just like mine. I hit submit, and I finally truly let them go. Months passed. The seasons changed, and with them, the entire emotional landscape of my life. The noise stopped. That was the first thing I noticed. For the first time since I could remember, my phone didn't buzz with guilt-inducing texts or manipulative phone calls. My email inbox was free of passive-aggressive family newsletters. The constant, low-grade hum of anxiety that had been the soundtrack to my life for 31 years simply faded away, leaving behind a profound and beautiful silence. In that silence, I began to rediscover myself. I started hiking on weekends, exploring the trails that wound through the hills east of San Diego, feeling the sun on my face and the solid earth beneath my feet. I took a pottery class, finding a strange and satisfying joy in shaping something new and whole from a simple lump of clay. I traveled. I took the money I was no longer siphoning into the black hole of my family's demands, and I bought a plane ticket to Italy, a trip I had dreamed of since I was a girl. I spent 2 weeks eating pasta, drinking wine, and exploring ancient ruins, accountable to no one but myself. One sunny afternoon, about a year after that fateful dinner, I found myself walking downtown. My path took me past La Violette. I paused on the sidewalk, looking at the elegant entrance, the heavy oak doors, the soft glow of the lights inside. I felt no anger, no bitterness, no lingering trauma. The memory was there, but it was like a scar that had long since faded, a reminder of a wound that had fully healed. Through the large window, I could see the main dining room. At a table near the front, a young woman in a beautiful silk dress was laughing with a group of friends, her face glowing with a joy that was pure and unburdened. She was celebrating something, a birthday or a promotion, and she was surrounded by people who clearly adored her. She reminded me of who I had wanted to be that night, before they had tried to break me. On an impulse, I walked inside. The maitre d' didn't recognize me. I asked for a small table for one. I sat down, ordered a glass of the same vintage of Cabernet Sauvignon and a slice of their famous chocolate lava cake. When it arrived, I raised my glass and made a silent toast. I toasted to peace. I toasted to strength. I toasted to the quiet, unshakable joy of a life lived on my own terms. The kind of joy you only find when you finally stop apologizing for your own worth. If you've ever had to stand up to family and walk away, you're not cold. You're finally free. Their version of love was a cage, and you simply chose to fly. Tell me your story in the comments. And remember, sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying them. It's living beautifully and completely without them. If this story resonated with you, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel.